Hello, and welcome to another episode of My Dog Will Eat My Face. In this podcast, I am going to deviate slightly and touch on a pet peeve of mine that will probably never go away. Now, it being the end of October, going into the early parts of November, obviously, it's around election time in the United States. So there's lots of political ads out there, people campaigning, people with signs, people giving their opinions, blah, blah, blah. But there is a particular word that I see used ubiquitously, God, I can't speak, ubiquitously with everyone I see. It's ingrained in the American parlance, and it's flatly wrong. It doesn't matter which part of the political spectrum you are. I see this happening with both. I see this happening with in house politicians that are career politicians that should know better, as well as you might say interviews on the street or protesters and the common everyday American. So, right from the very bottom, the ditch diggers, all the way up to members of Congress and beyond, they use this word. And it drives me crazy because it's an erroneous categorization of what the United States of America is. And at this point, it just gets under my skin. So this is not a political podcast. You could don't worry about that. I'm not getting into politics. God, that's like playing with fire and torches and oily rags. No, I'm not going to do that. But this failure in understanding and the language that's used all over the political spectrum is really disturbing to me for a lot of different reasons. And I don't know if any of this would be offensive to anyone. I don't see why it would be, because it's just stating a fact and correcting a fact that you often hear within our, again, political elites, down to word on the street, down to talking to your friends. And they all use the same word and the same description, and they are all incorrect who use this single word. So, for this special podcast, if you want to call it that, in the spirit of the upcoming election, I want to talk about this pet peeve because this time of year is when I hear it the most. And as I've gotten older, it's become seemingly more prevalent. And I would not be surprised that I first die from my head exploding in frustration than from any cardiac issue because I'm so sick of it. So, a little bit different flavor of a podcast today, but I've got to get this off my chest and at least educate my good listeners, who I think are probably intelligent people. I can't imagine anyone subbing to me or listening to me who's not intelligent. They wouldn't be able to understand a lot of this. That is, a lot of the things I talk about. So I see this as a public service to those good, intelligent people to hopefully, one, correct the language within themselves, and two, be that guy, be that jerk in the room that corrects everyone who uses this term. It's almost like being a grammar Nazi, but not quite as bad. It won't make you popular, but correcting people on this simple fact will paint a clear picture of reality and why some things actually are the way they are in the United States. And once you understand that and you can verbalize it, I think that's when any argument you're trying to make can be more easily solidified and meshed with um, the political nature, the sort of governments of these United States. So it's better for everyone, in my opinion. And this in no way is going to be a position on anything political or candidate, because I hear this everywhere, both sides, in the middle, far right, far left, everywhere I hear this. And I'm freaking out, and I got to get this off my chest. So bear with me on this very special uh, podcast episode. Okay, so the word that I keep hearing used by political pundits, folks in office, people in our government, political organizations and parties, down to the common folk, the people that are just working to make a living and put food on the table. Or if you're George W. Bush, you're trying to put tables on your food. That's something he said. He said that he wants to help people that are just trying to put a table on their food. He reversed it. That's a fun George W. Bush quote for people trying to put tables on their food. That's what he's fighting for. Look it up. He said it. Anyway, the word in question, I'll start there. The word in question is democracy, or any derivative of that, right? Democracy, democratic. That's with a lower D. These are all with lower Ds. I'm not talking about the Democratic Party. Um, Anything that you can pull from that word. And I hear it so often, especially during election season, that I just start to freak out. And the reason to your seats. I'm going to share something with all of you that might send your head through the roof and cause terrible, terrible, I don't know, trauma. But the United States of America as a nation is not, was not designed as, nor has ever been a true democracy in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. It is not, nor was it designed to be a country with democratic values. And now you can see why I hear this ubiquitously. Congress folks, congresswomen, congressmen, I think the president, local officials, people in the street, they say, well, our democracy, blah, 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 blah. We don't have a democracy in this country. There are countries where there are democracies. We are not one of them. The United States of America is not a democracy and was never designed to be one, explicitly in its foundation in the Constitution. The way the articles were written out and the way the powers were separated, it was not designed to ever be a democracy. So, you can imagine that might make me a little cranky when I hear everyone and their brothers saying, our democracy, or the American democracy, or our democratic values, or he or she is against our democratic values or our democracy, blah, blah, blah. And I just have to bite my tongue so hard I'm bleeding because I am just so sick of this misunderstanding of what type of government the United States has, what it was created to have, and what it technically never, ever, ever was. So I'll explain this a little further here in the next segment. So, without further ado, I'm just going to come out and tell you the type of government that the United States of America has, was designed specifically to have, and then I'll touch into why that was done and why the founders were adamantly against the formation of a direct democracy. They did this on purpose because they were terrified of what may become through a democracy. So, the United States has what's called a constitutional republic form of government. It is not a democracy. Again, it's a constitutional republic. You don't even vote on the president. You can vote all you want until you're blue in the face on the ballot box, It's it doesn't matter. The vote for president is done by an electoral college, which is chosen by state legislators, and elect the president. Now, they're supposed to follow the popular vote of their state, but they don't have to. They could legally just vote however they want, and they go there once a year to DC once a year and do the vote, and that is the actual election of president, not election night. That is just guidance for the electors to know how to vote. Your vote, just by itself, is meaningless. You've never elected a president, ever. The Electoral College has. And you've also never elected an elector, ever. The state legislator has. And you have elected a state legislator. So that's where there is some power from the foundation, from the people, into this form of government. But as you can see, it is separated from the the results by, I don't know, like three separate steps that could go a different direction than how you vote. And they are perfectly at liberty to do so. It's not really happened, certainly not happened in recent time. I don't think maybe it's happened a little bit in past. I honestly don't know. I'd have to look up if the electors have ever gone against the popular vote in their state. That would be a fun thing to look up. I don't know if that's ever happened or not, but I do know for sure that they have the right to do that. Might be the last political thing they ever do. They might get fired, but they can do that. Also, you were never supposed to elect a senator when this country was formed. The Senate was originally similar to the electors in that it was elected by state legislators. They were never elected by popular vote, not until the 17th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution in around 1913 allowed the populace to vote for senators. And so, what you see over time, especially at the turn of the 20th century and forward, there's been a lot of shift towards adding democratic, more or at least more democratic components to the American government. But I'll tell you, the founders of the United States, if you read the Federalist Papers, the Constitution, etc., and the letters they wrote, they were terrified of that because they knew and believed that a democracy, a pure democracy, one man, one vote, or one woman, one vote, after they got suffrage, after women got suffrage, they were so scared of that because that could be just as tyrannical as a king or an emperor or any other autocrat. For example, in a pure democracy where every vote counts per person and they can choose whatever they want, there is nothing to stop 51% of the population to enslave or to murder the remaining 49%. That's democratic. That is democracy. It allows that. And there have been many times in history when democracies were downright tyrannical because of that. Because they can disenfranchise minorities and vote and subjects that are against their protection or interest. And in essence, the majority will just rule over them. And the founders don't want, I shouldn't say don't, didn't. I believe they're all dead now. But the founders didn't want that. They were adamantly afraid of tyranny because they were just on the cusp of a tyrannical king in their minds. So a lot of the design of the United States was to make things difficult on government to become tyrannical in any way. And democracy, in their opinion and in mine, can be just as tyrannical as an autocrat can be if it's a pure democracy. So, being a constitutional republic, the United States was designed in a way to where the common person on the street had limited voting powers to elect perhaps a powerful but knowledgeable minority who would then elect further to run the state or the country. There is multiple degrees of separation between the people and the rule of the government. Additionally, as a constitutional republic, not just a republic, as a constitutional republic, the founders created a constitution that became the rule of law of the land. And you'll hear the cliche, we are a nation of laws. We are ruled by laws, not people. And that's where that came from. That's still said today. We are ruled by laws, not people. And that's a good thing, I think. Any of you can disagree. You could be a communist. I don't care. I've had many of communist friends. I'm fine with you. I'm serious. To me, none of this is personal. But the Constitution was designed in a way to protect the minority from the tyranny of the majority. So if that 51% says, well, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, the Supreme Court could walk in and say, yo, that's unconstitutional. You can't do that. Bam, and it's gone. And you bet that's happened many times before. A good example is the Jim Crow laws, enacted by states under the purview of the 10th Amendment of the Constitution to limit and harass and diminish the participation in government of African Americans once they were emancipated. It took the federal government and the constitutional rules and the Supreme Court to say no, X, Y, and Z state, you can't do that, thereby protecting the minority against the rule of the majority. Now, if we were just a democracy, Jim Crow might still be around to this day, or worse. And even further, the Constitution really underscores the protection of, well, the minority, as I said, but that also includes the minority of just one. You, as a person, you are a minority. You are a single person. And sometimes in the law, when we're dealing with cases, that's the person or the minority that's being protected. Just one guy or gal. And who knows where that might be the minority. Ergo, our original national model, e pluribus unum, which is just Latin for out of many, one, to where you, as a single individual, have rights and value that cannot be taken away from you or any authority, no matter how strongly that authority is in charge or embedded in the government. You are supposed to be protected. That's the purpose of the Constitution in a lot of senses. So, not a democracy. Now, as I've already alluded to before, we've slowly drifted more towards um, democratic values, especially at the turn of the 20th century, which is when the 17th Amendment came forward and allowed individuals to directly elect the Senate. It used to be the House of Representatives would be elected by the people, but the Senate was elected by the state legislature. And that was the higher house and the two houses. They based this on the Roman Republic. The Senate, the Senatus in Rome, and their House of Representatives was the tribune of the plebs, of the plebeians. And in fact, there's a fun fact you can say at your cocktail parties. The president and vice president, for the longest time, were the top two candidates to receive the most votes in the presidential election through the Electoral College. So you would have Jim Bob as the president, and he campaigns against Mary Lou as who wanted to run as president too, but she came in second place. So what would happen historically is Jimbo would be president and Mary Lou would be vice president, and they have to work together. Could you imagine that if that was still the case today? If Donald Trump had no choice but to work with Kamala Harris? That's literally how the government was run for a very long time. It again emulated a lot of the Roman model of a republic, in which they had two consuls, so that no singular person had an overwhelming power that could turn tyrannical over the state. Well, that's gone too. So if you ever get a weird itch and a weird feeling that the government's becoming more and more tyrannical over time, snooping in your business more and more over time, that's because it is. because people let it. They vote for these things that sound good. They're democratic values, and that just makes people feel ooey gooey, warm and fuzzy and wonderful inside. And they feel like they themselves are giving themselves a tremendous amount of power. And that might be true, but they are also giving those who are their enemies a tremendous amount of power. You have to think about that. While you yourself, as an individual, through some sort of action, but legislative action, have a more pronounced power in government, so too do your political enemies. And I don't think anyone wants that. So, in my personal opinion, the people have been kind of bamboozled because it sounds nice to give power to the people. It sounds good, doesn't it? We people here, they're like, yeah, we should choose, what's going on. We don't want a king or anything else ruling over us. But at the same time, you don't want the majority. Because if that's all it takes, it could end very, very badly for you. Ergo, that's why the United States of America was founded as, and technically still is, a constitutional republic. It is not a democracy. So, whenever you hear someone say our democratic values, and you'll hear politicians saying this, folks that should know better, you hear references to our democracy, which we're not, and things similar to that. It's all ooey gooey, warm, touchy feely things to make you feel good. Whereas if we were a true democracy, it would be terrifying. Eventually, your turn would come up in the and the mole whacking limitation of liberties. Eventually, they will target you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually it will come after you. So the constitutional vice and the separation of powers as they are put onto our government in the United States is done in an attempt to prevent just that for as long as possible. What's interesting, too, I'll add really quick, is that the founders really had a keen understanding that constitutional republics, or any republic, even a classical republic, is hard to, or is difficult to keep running as such. There's a constant encroachment of other things that sound good, like democratic things, that can suddenly become tyrannical. And there's a great example of this. When they were in Philadelphia forging the Constitution of the United States, someone you may know, have heard of very well, Mr. Benjamin Franklin was walking out of the building, and a bystander yelled to Mr. Franklin, what form of government are you giving us back there as they write the Constitution? And Ben Franklin famously said, well, a republic, if you can keep it. What haunting words. A republic, if you can keep it. Because over time, we have indeed slid away from those principles bit by bit. So, little scary. Or just a really smart guy. I'll go with the later, really smart guy. Weird guy. He used to exercise in his fully open window to his home, butt naked in front of everybody on the street. Ben Franklin did this. I'm not making this up. He would just be completely stark naked, window wide open, or he'd do it in his garden, in the morning, exercises to keep him active. He was a quirky little guy, but a smart, quirky little guy. Now, before I end this random little rant, I can't imagine why anyone would be mad about this because it's not political in a sense that I take no position in this with respect to policy. It's completely independent of policy. It's merely a reflection of how the government functions. And hopefully gives a better understanding as to why the government of the United States functions in the certain ways that it does function. And next time you hear a friend say, we're a democracy, you can absolutely shut them up and correct them. No, we're not. We never were and we're never meant to be. We're a constitutional republic. Oh, one other fun fact I gotta share too. When we created, via the Constitution, obviously, the Senate, which is the higher house. In the UK, you have the House of Lords. In the United States, it's the Senate. And they got that straight from the Roman government, the Senatus, as they called it. And Senatus in Latin has a really funny meaning. It literally means nothing more than a group of old men. So that's the Senate. It's a group of old men. But I think what they were trying to go for was the older and the wiser men, the ones that have been through many circumstances and events and are able to be respected for their knowledge and their wisdom to help guide the Republic through turbulent and even prosperous times. That was the whole idea. But that's just a fun fact. Senate, bunch of old people. That's all it means. And golly, that became more true than any of us would have ever imagined. So, be sure to bring that up as well at your next cocktail party. Everyone will love that. So, with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and cut this little rant off. I've said my piece, I think. I'll probably think of something at 3 o'clock in the morning that I want to add, but we'll see. That's my pet peeve. And that's why it's my pet peeve. And I think the foundation of the United States as a constitutional republic was the very first nation built ground up based on um, Western liberalism. And that's not liberalism as Americans think of it today. Western liberalism is more of the opening of thought and removing governance from the kings and queens and creating a governance that respects, protects, and provides for the people instead of a ruler. And that is simply, I think, the best experiment we've had in human history as far as governance. Now, don't get me wrong, the United States has had plenty of mistakes in its past. Plenty. I'm not naive. But at least it was the first experiment with founding a country based on Western liberal thinking that was starting to percolate in Western Europe, and would shortly soon after American independence would lead to the French Revolution. Slightly more bloody, but it's somewhat more or less originated from the same way of thinking of Western liberalism. So, since it was built from the ground up based on that, I still think it's the best chance I got to retain some sort of liberty by staying in this country. And that's just my 2 cents. If it goes all pear shaped and turned into a horrific tyrannical regime, absolutely. As Benjamin Franklin said, I've given you a republic if you can keep it. And so I'm going to cut this podcast off now. I've said my piece, I've finished my rant, I got it off my chest. Thank you so much for listening to it. I do do appreciate you giving me a venue through which I can voice these awkward, random vexations. But be it as it may, there you go. It has nothing to do with the central theme of the podcast, but it's just a pet peeve that I can never let down. If you want to support the podcast, you can always go to the podcast website on Spotify, click on support this podcast, or even better, go to patreon.com/my dog will eat my face. But again, you've already at least given me a really good therapy session for allowing me to have a venue to vent my pet peeve. And why I have an almost aneurysm every election period because that pet peeve is shoveled around more frequently than horse manure. My God, it's everywhere. From people who should know better. That's what gets me. Oh well, be it as it may, that's my short little rant. Thank you for listening. And I'm just going to have to say ciao for now.